Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Cool People. Now, over the last few years, after coming out very publicly as being trans and doing lots of trans awareness training and public speaking and media appearances about trans issues, I've met all sorts of amazing people with incredible stories to tell, and I've made lots of new friends. And so the whole idea of this series is to share my friends with you. And so my latest friend who I'm going to share with you today is a lovely lady called Robin Moira White. And she is a barrister, but she also happens to be trans, and she's very publicly trans. So welcome to Cool People, Robin.
Thank you for inviting me.
So it's brilliant that I finally got you on, because we've been chatting on social media quite a bit, and so it's brilliant to finally pin you down. So there's lots we've got to talk about today, and particularly regarding a landmark case that you won. So I really want to talk about that later. But I think first of all, I'd like to talk about you personally and the journey that you've been on. So I just wondered about sort of taking you right back to maybe the first time you felt different, or what your experiences are.
I was brought up in rural Somerset, and I'm so old that plainly the internet wasn't. Tim Berners-Lee, I don't think had even thought of the thought of connecting two computers together when I was young.
You're only 6 years older than me, Robin.
Well, there we go. But I've had help, obviously, along the way. Thank you very much. But yeah, so I reckon I knew by 6 or 7 that I felt differently about myself, differently than I was supposed to feel about myself.
Yeah.
No internet, rural Somerset, really good parents, but parents not really on the page with difference, shall we say. And I had 2 sisters who went to a different school than me. And back in those days, there were only 3 channels. Channel 4 hadn't even been thought of.
Right. Yeah.
And ITV was on. It was pretty useless to us in Somerset, because after 6 o'clock it turned into HTV. And I speak better Welsh these days than I did then, but there was really only BBC 1 and BBC 2 in the evening.
Yeah.
But my 2 sisters had gone off. My parents had gone off to a parents' evening for my 2 sisters, and there was a program on the TV about a trans person. And what are we now? I was about 12 or 13. So that must have been 74, 75, something like that. And I was spellbound. That was exactly how I felt about myself. And I wasn't alone. Up to that point, I thought I was the one person in the world.
Yeah.
I wasn't. And that put the pieces together for me.
Okay. And so and then so once you'd seen that, what happened then?
Well, I started to see what I could find in the local library.
Yeah.
And I attended Somerset's last county grammar school, but it was a boys' school.
Okay.
So strangely, I ended up as library prefect not long after that. I can't imagine why. It allowed me to order in a book or 2 and start to understand that there might be people like me in the rest of the world. But equally, it demonstrated to me how, quotes, unacceptable my views about myself were in the society I was in. It was not a come out. And I rapidly formed the view that what I would have to do is make my way in the world, go through a university, and when I was out on my own, make my choices in life. And so that's what I did.
Right. Okay. And so and throughout that time, did you ever explore cross-dressing or anything like that? Sort of
And not to any great extent.
No.
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 Do what I wanted to do, but it just wasn't a possibility, really.
Yeah. For me, it was the other way around. It was a slower thing. I've always had gender dysphoria there ever since about age sort of 3 or 4. And then, I cross-dressed all that time, although I wasn't admitting to myself that's what I was doing. So, yeah. So, it wasn't until I was 48 that I admitted to myself that I was trans. So I had all that time. Yeah. So then with you, so then you went through university, and then was it after that then you decided to?
Yeah, well, I went to university in London. I was privileged to study at Imperial.
Mm.
I turned down a place at Oxford to go to Imperial, which is another story for another time. But it's not really
Okay.
to what we're talking about today. But I always sort of knew my own mind a bit, I think. And the great thing about Imperial being in London is it was in London, and so therefore I had a friend at university who was openly gay, which in the early 80s was a biggish thing,
It was, yeah.
to be openly gay, but a university environment was a freer environment than other places. And Imperial was odd, actually. If you did your science, it didn't matter what you were. You could be blue, pink, black, whatever. Nobody cared. If you could make things happen inside a test tube, they were happy with you. And I definitely wasn't gay, because I went to a club or two with my friend, and that wasn't me. And there were a couple of clubs for trans people in London at the time that I went to. The only difficulty was they all seemed to be aged about 93. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to strike out on my own.
Yeah.
And it came to the end of my time at university, and I chose to go and work for British Railways. A, because I had an interest, and B, because they had, pretty specifically, I chose them because they were quite equality forward. They had an equal opportunities policy. And remember that by now we're talking about 84, 85. And the Sex Discrimination Act came into, it was enacted in the mid-70s, and the Race Relations Act the following year, 74, 75, 76. So only talking a decade after those acts had come into force, and business generally was still getting its head around equality and diversity. But British Rail were trying. I mean, they had to. They were a large public corporation.
Yeah.
And I applied, and there were 1,400 applicants in my year, and I was one of 7 on their accelerated promotion scheme.
Oh, wow.
With people like who are the equivalents today. So in my cohort were Diane Crowther, who's chief exec of HS1, the high-speed line to the coast. Howard Smith, who's chief operating officer for Crossrail. Jonathan Fox, who's director rail for Transport for London. And that's where we were headed. So we were the senior management for the future. And I was good at it. I could actually make the trains run on time. Don't laugh. It's possible to do. The railways is just this wonderful 3-dimensional chess game to make it work. And people thought I was good at it. And that was fine for 5 years until I found myself at Bristol, and I'd done a good job in Bristol. And I applied for the next level up, move up. I was traffic manager at Bristol. If you put a compass point in Bristol and drew a 30-mile circle, that was me.
Okay.
The railways in that area, I had about 120 staff, paperless budget of about 12 million. And the next move up was to another area, I won't say where I would be the area operations manager. So the next level up. And it was an area that was going to go through considerable change over the next couple of years. So perfect for me. And I was interviewed for the post, was found to be the right person for the job. And then the offer letter didn't come. And I went to my personnel manager and said, well, come on, where's my offer letter? And so he chased up what was going on. And it turned out that the area manager decided that, I'd been open about the fact I was trans. So
right, I was going to ask about that, yeah.
I should have, I'll fill that bit in a moment. Let's fill that bit in. So during my training, one of the great things about being a management trainee was that you got to meet very senior people. And we had a talk one day from the deputy director of personnel for British Railways. And at the end of the talk, I said, look, there's something personal I'd like to come and talk to you about. And that was perfectly normal for trainees to do that with very senior people. And a week later, I found myself in London having lunch with him and explained my circumstance. And he said, well, that's fine. We have an equal opportunities policy. You know, all that matters is, can you do the job? you know, what should I do? And he said, well, keep your personnel manager informed, which along the way. But anyway, the area manager in this particular area decided that I might do something unusual during the couple of years that I would be with him. And so they appointed the second best candidate to the job.
God.
And this is 1990. So remember, we're 9 years away from the sex discrimination gender regulations. And the argument went up through the levels and ended up as a row across the table at the British Railways Board, with Director Ops saying we have an equal opportunities policy, it must mean something. And Director Personnel saying we have an equal opportunities policy, and Director Ops saying my area manager must have a free choice. And the chairman of British Railways at the time asked the question across the table, is this person legally protected? And the answer, of course, was no at that point. And so down came the answer, you're not having the job. And
disgraceful.
Oh no, it gets worse. Oh no, we haven't plumbed the depths of this yet. And we've thought about this, they said, and we don't think it's right. What don't you think's right? Well, you're quite a public person, and trans is okay for the odd train driver and signalman and stuff, but you're quite public. You go to Bristol Council meetings and things to talk about railways, and we don't think that's right. We really value the ops work you do, and we could create a job for you at regional headquarters at Swindon where nobody would have to see you. They actually said it.
That's terrible.
Nobody would actually see you. And I said, up yours. And in fact, Director Personnel rang me and said, do you want us to fight this for you? Because we think this is wrong. And I said, yes. And then it got even worse, because the following Friday, so they'd said, give them a fortnight or so and they would work out what to do. And I said, we can't rescue the job for you at the place where you were supposed to go, but we will make sure that an appropriate position is found, a move on is found. And while they were thinking about how to do that following Friday, I was arrested for theft by the British Transport Police and marched out of my workplace and sent home. I was at home for 8 weeks with no contact. And then they called me back in at the end of the 8 weeks and they said, gosh, yes, you're quite right. There was nothing in this. And I'd said at the time, look, please speak to X. These charges are completely trumped up. And the policeman had said, I have my orders. That's what he said. Anyway, they called me back in 8 weeks later and said, well, yeah, you're right. What tragedy, there was nothing in this. But of course, we can't put you back in your job because your staff saw you marched out.
Oh, that's
confidence in you. And someone else has been doing your job quite successfully for the last 6 weeks or so. Do you remember that hidey hole job at Region that we could put you in?
That's awful.
The fuses blew. I'm told I resigned, but I don't. I have about a 3-month gap when I don't have any clear memory. And some friends looked after me. It was quite a dark time, to be honest.
Not surprised.
And I strangely emerged from that dark tunnel, heading back to university to read law, to turn myself into a discrimination barrister. Can't possibly imagine what the connection is between those two, between the events.
Not surprised.
I mean, people say, is transition the right thing to do? I transitioned in 2011. And until a year or so after transition, I could not have talked to you about those events without bursting into a flood of tears and being in a despond for a month.
I'm not surprised.
You never take away the pain.
No.
Never take away the fact that here I was in a career that I was committed to, that I was good at.
Yeah.
And that didn't matter. Fine. We don't want you because you're trans. And I'm privileged now. And I reckon one of the rationales for heading for the bar was it was reckoned to be one of the most difficult things to do. It certainly is a narrow, difficult pathway to follow to have a practice at the independent bar. You've just got to be good, you've got to be lucky, and you've got to be a business person as well. And it's a combination of skills. So I'm sure there was a subconscious element of proving my worth to myself, what I then chose to do. Other people will judge whether I achieved that, but what I would say in the same breath, and I would say it very loudly, is that the railway today is very different. And I work with, I have an association with Great Western Railway, and I have an association with Network Rail. In fact, I'm the only barrister in the country with a National Network personal track safety certificate. So I'm permitted to walk off the end of the platforms at Birmingham New Street.
Right.
Choose to. Not that I, forgive me, anybody out there listening, not that I choose to very often. But I still, and I'm a committee member of a thing called the Institution of Railway Operators. So I attempt to do things for the future of the rail industry still. And the vast bulk of the rail industry, so certainly Network Rail and certainly Great Western, understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that giving them the access to the best pool of potential talent. And it's never a finished job. There are always difficulties. There was a horrendous anti-trans incident at Plymouth a couple of years ago. And these things will continue to happen until we've taught society properly about people and we've educated people properly. And that will take decades and probably will never be a finished job. Thank goodness, given that I'm a discrimination barrister. No, I didn't entirely mean that, but you know, it will always be a work in progress. But what I would say is that the railways today are in a totally different place than they were in 1990.
Yeah. And
I'm pleased to be able to help a little bit with that on occasion.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. So then after that, so you trained to become a barrister,
Yeah.
and then but obviously with law, you know, it's a very sort of traditional. I don't know if I should say stuck in its ways sort of type.
No. It does. It has tradition going back to 1146 or whatever, and I love it because the level of I mean, those traditions are part of the things that you take on a case for somebody, you meet them for the first time, hopefully not always just at the court in the morning, hopefully before that in a serious matter, but they never met you before, and they put their trust in you. And that's built on the bar's traditions of independence and intellectual rigor and hard work and dedication to doing the right thing for their client. And those professional standards are tremendously important to the profession and to me personally.
Yeah. So how were you accepted, and how did you fit in as an openly trans person within that profession?
Well, given my previous experiences, I've been significantly frightened off transition. So it wasn't until 2011. So I'm 95 core, but I didn't transition until 2011.
Right. Okay.
By which time, so that is 16 years in practice.
Okay.
And by which time I was by then at Old Square Chambers, where I practice from, which is in the sort of magic circle of employment and discrimination sets. So it's this year we're Chambers of the Year, rated by and partners.
Well done, brilliant.
And it's just the best place to be. It's just they're scarily bright, and don't let them hear me say that. But they're also good. They're tough fighters, but they do it properly and with proper professional standards, and it's just a tremendous place to be.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Of course, they helped me through my transition as well. So,
did they know? Were you?
No, not when I applied to. I'd been with them a couple of years. I sort of had in mind. I knew I was moving towards transition at that time when I changed from my previous chambers, and I knew that they had a reputation for being very, very down the line appropriate in terms of looking after people with protected characteristics. They have. We actually have slightly more female barristers than male. By a few, we have openly gay members. We have members from ethnic minorities. In fact, one of the jokes that went around, I was there when the 2010 Equality Act was passed, and one of the jokes that went around was that we'd drawn short straws to make sure we covered all the 9 characteristics in the Equality Act, and I'd drawn the trans straw, because of course 2010 Act, and I transitioned in 2011, so it was fairly soon thereafter.
Yeah, brilliant.
And you will have noted that whatever disappeared in Thailand shortly thereafter, my sense of humour stays firmly in place. and I don't mind, a joke or two like that's good. So
that's what I would say to people. Yeah, you don't actually lose your sense of humour when you transition.
Well, I didn't. I mean, some people never had one in the first place, and that makes life very long and very hard. But what I would say is I also owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to my then head of chambers, Jane McNeill QC, who allowed me to work through how transition was going to work for me as a practitioner in an exemplary way. This wasn't something being done to me. I was involved in the discussions with her and the senior clerk as to how we managed things and what have you. She also, she's semi-retired now. She sits as a judge now, but she has a tremendous sense of humour. I remember going to tell her what the circumstance was, and she's a busy barrister and so was I, and it had taken 3 or 4 weeks before we were both in chambers, and I said, look, there's something I want to come and talk to you about, but I'd rather do it face to face. It's not desperate urgent, let's do it when we're next both in chambers and we can sit around your table. And so I told her what the circumstance was, and she said, I'm so relieved. And of all the things I might have expected my head of chambers, it was not, I'm so relieved. And I said, why did you say that? And she said, well, I'd sort of tried to think what it was you were coming to talk to me about. I knew you weren't leaving chambers, which is what sometimes people go to talk their head of chambers about. And she said, I decided that you were probably going to come and tell me you were terminally ill.
I've had people say that to me.
And
it's exactly the same.
Yeah, well, I know. And she said, it's got to be better than being terminally ill.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, it is better than being terminally ill. We both fell about with laughter.
Yeah.
So, and then she'd actually come back from doing a case a couple of days beforehand, and she leant across the table and she said, you're going to have to get used to being patronised. And I said, what do you mean? And Jane McNeill she was the female eminence grise of employment law cases, because she'd been in it. Employment law, current employment law was invented in the early 70s or mid 70s, and she'd been doing it since it started, really.
Right.
And she'd been in front of a male employment judge for a few days before this, and she wanted to get off it when we were having this meeting. She wanted to get off her chest the fact that she'd been patronised by this judge. She said, you will have to get used to being patronised if you want to be a female barrister. And I said, oh, I'd quite like to be patronised, on the basis that what I meant was it would be
validates you
of the transition being accepted.
Yeah.
And she stopped and sort of looked at me and went, and then we rolled with laughter again. So, barristers might have a reputation of being a bit straight-laced, but we we extract the humour that there is from our circumstances.
And have you experienced anybody patronising you for being...
Not really. I think, to be frank, I'm not easy to patronise. I am a bit scary, and it goes with the territory. There is a client who calls me the angel of death, because of sometimes cross-examination is the second most fun you can have with your clothes on, and so being a bit scary is something that's quite good for the reputation.
Yeah.
So no, I've not had that generally. I've had a bit of mansplaining a couple of times. Which was fun, but what was interesting, and I was sort of sensitive to the changes, and I was having a sort of out-of-body experience when I was transitioning, and I remember wandering towards, at that point in chambers, my room was up on the 3rd floor, and we have a lift, and I remember walking towards the lift, and I picked up a set of papers from the clerk's room, and I'm sort of reading the start of the set of papers, walking towards the lift, and another member of chambers also walked towards the lift at the same time, and we stood there, and I'm being polite and letting them get into the lift first, and they're being polite and letting me get into the lift first. And if one of us hadn't looked up, we'd still be standing there now. And it's those little social things about who gets into a lift first.
I've done that.
Which of us hasn't done that? And it's those things. And it was interesting transitioning in court, because I sometimes you do directions hearings and you've got a case later. And I remember doing that across the period when I transitioned. And I've got a good female friend at the bar. And what I didn't want ever to do is surprise anybody by the fact that I turned up looking differently. So I transitioned in the summer, and I remember doing a directions hearing in April, May, where we set up arrangements for a case that was going to be heard in September, October. And I was against this female barrister who I know well and is a friend. And if you're a specialist, that often happens because you're against people you know. And I'd explained that I was going to turn up looking somewhat different in September, October to my friend. And I said, well, I think we should tell the judge, just so that nobody's surprised. And she laid a hand on my arm and said, do you want me to say something? And I said, no, it's all right. I'm perfectly happy to. And then I realized that we'd known each other at that point for at least 10 years, and we'd never physically touched each other before. Because in our culture, I'm a man in business, all right? I would not come into physical contact with a woman. But she had instantly changed the way she regarded me, as if I was now a female colleague. Acceptable to lay a hand on your arm, when you're speaking. It was, I was sort of very, because I do body language. Body language is something that we watch a lot in terms of people. And part of my job is to deconstruct people.
Of course, yeah.
And that partly was what was happening with me. So
wow, amazing. And when you first went into court as the real you, how did you feel?
Oh no, there's a much better instance.
Okay.
Which is when I first came into chambers as the real me.
Okay.
And people say, do you have any regrets? And I have one really big regret, which is that chambers were quite conscious of what the reaction was going to be, particularly from the clerks' rooms. Clerks have this reputation for being barrow boys, even if they're not. I mean, they now come from very diverse backgrounds. Traditionally, they used to be sons of barristers' clerks, and they were all from Essex, and their mates all worked in market somewhere. But now they come from very diverse backgrounds. But there's an element of the barrow boy nature about clerks' rooms still.
Okay.
The senior clerk was a bit concerned about what the reaction would be from the clerks' room. So we'd arranged it that they'd been told on the Thursday or Friday, and I would appear on the following Monday. So they'd had the weekend to sort of work it out of their system.
Yeah.
They'd been told not to react. However I turned up, don't react. And I turned up on the Monday doing my very best impression of a female barrister, dressed in black from head to toe, of course. It does make wardrobe management so much easier.
Lawyers always wear black, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's what the clients expect. You see, it's part of gaining the confidence is that you have to be what they expect. But anyway, I walked into the clerk's room, and there were clerks not reacting so hard. There were clerks staring at blank computer screens, not reacting. It was very funny, actually. And my regret is that I didn't turn up dressed as Carmen Miranda that day with a bowl of fruit on my head. And, it would have been really interesting to test how far we could get not
high
react.
kicking and jazz hands.
Yeah, no, something like that. But, so that was... and
your heart must have been in your mouth though when you doing that.
Anybody who's done this will know that it's like that moment when you go over the top on the biggest roller coaster in the world. You're out of control. I mean, I can still remember very clearly walking from the bus stop to chambers, and there being an element of panic about it. But we barristers don't do open emotion. So I sort of had my key in my hand to go in the front door, and I can remember that, and that's 10 years later. So
yeah, wow.
Nobody should underestimate that moment.
No, it's not easy, is it? No,
but it rapidly became very easy. It rapidly became a non-story. I mean, fortunately, the Times newspaper at the time was under different editorship than it is at the moment. It's become the most awful rag.
Terrible now. It's so anti-trans now. It's awful.
Well, you may know that I I had the privilege of cross-examining the editor of the Times in the Scottish Tribunal last summer.
Oh yes, that's right.
About his approach to trans.
Mm.
But at the time, it was under a different editorship, and it had a different approach. A great piece of advice I had was to tell your story yourself, because I was the first discrimination barrister to transition, and I knew Frances Kibb at the Times, who was the Times law correspondent, quite well. And so I rang her up and I said, that moment in the summer when you haven't got anything particular to write about because all the legal world are on holiday, I think I've got something for you this summer.
Just tell the story.
Yeah, and so we wrote the piece, and it's a really nice piece, and it's great advice actually, is to tell your story yourself.
Yeah,
if you feel up to it. I mean, it's not, nobody should feel pressured to do it, but and everybody then used to read the Law Times, which I think was I forget whether it was on a Tuesday or a Thursday. I don't buy it anymore. I don't buy the Times anymore, but it meant that I didn't have to explain myself, that the word had gone around the profession in that way, and the story was out there and was old news by the turn of the year.
Yeah, brilliant. And you've gone on to do such amazing work, and I want to come on now to a landmark case that you won. So it was the case of Rose Taylor versus Jaguar LandRover, and it concerned them not accepting that or recognising that non-binary people were recognised within the Equality Act 2010. So do you want to just run us through what happened there?
So let's do brief facts. So Rose was, just as a preface, we're using she, her pronouns for Rose because although at the time we're going to talk about, she identified as gender fluid stroke non-binary, by the time we came to try the case either side of August bank holiday in 2020, she now identifies as female. So we're using female pronouns.
Fine.
And one or two people have said, how come she was gender fluid and now you're using female pronouns for her? That's anyway, she had worked at Jaguar LandRover for thick end of 20 years, was a very well-respected engineer working to make better Jaguars and Land Rovers, and went to her management in 2017 and said, well, in fact, I'm going to transition. I would describe myself as gender fluid stroke non-binary. And at one level, the employer were helpful in that her direct line manager helped her tell the team what was happening, and the first day seemed okay, and then it went horribly wrong because they took no step whatsoever to brief that out to the rest of the workforce, to do anything that would protect her. And because she wasn't moving sort of directly from one end of the binary spectrum to the other, her transition was, didn't consist of now presenting as perfectly female or attempting to, but included dressing in female relevant clothes for some days of the week, largely. And we're talking about an engineering environment, so we're not talking about ball gowns, but we're talking about, slacks and Marks and Spencer's tops, which were appropriate to the workplace. But she then started to get comments along the lines of, have you seen it today? Is that your Halloween outfit? Must be very difficult to walk in those shoes. And comments that perhaps could be taken as complimentary. So, cracking pair of legs. Well, okay, they're in the sense they're complimentary, but you wouldn't say that to a female member of staff in the workplace. I mean, we worked out 20 years ago that was inappropriate. And certainly in the context of the other remarks, those were hurtful. And she reported them to management, and they did absolutely nothing. And their approach was, if you name names, if you tell us who did this, we'll call the individual in and tear them off a strip. And of course, the fear was that what that does is turn you into the person who points at somebody else and gets somebody else into trouble.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to make it worse and worse. For people who don't know, JLR is a very large employer. The site she worked on had 13,000 employees and workers. They have a lot of contractors on site as well. And in the West Midlands, the company has about 50,000 working people.
It's huge, huge. Yeah,
it is huge. So we're not talking about Arkwright's shop.
No.
And the appalling thing was that the attitude they had was that we're engineers and we make good cars, and all this diversity and equality stuff is for HR to deal with, which might have been okay if HR had the faintest idea what they were doing, but they didn't. So she raised some of the problems with HR, and the response was, grow a tougher skin. This is going to be a difficult period for you. It's up to you to put up with it. And she raised they called me it comment with an HR advisor, whose response was, what do you expect them to call you? Oh yeah, no, that's, part of what happened.
Terrible.
Oh yeah, well, the tribunal, it's worth reading the judgment, because it is, the tribunal say that they'd never seen anything so terrible in their collective experience, nor have I in 25 years worth of doing employment law. And they described the approach of HR as being woeful, and it truly was. And where we got to was that then Rose Taylor got iller and iller. She had some periods off. She was at one point had suicidal ideation and was referred to occupational health, which the tribunal were not impressed by, because the employers were prepared to refer her to occupational health to deal with the symptoms. And occupational health is saying, look, this is caused by the stress of the way this person's being treated in the workplace. But they weren't doing anything to deal with the cause. And so eventually she resigned before she jumped off a cliff, I think. And fortunately came to a firm of solicitors, good firm of solicitors, who had the courage, and she had the courage to bring the case. And fortunately it came my way, which was a delight for me. Now, initially it was defended on the basis, she brought a constructive dismissal claim and an anti-gender reassignment discrimination claim. And they didn't initially take the point that there was any difficulty about her being covered by the Gender Recognition Act, by the Gender Reassignment parts of the Equality Act. But several months into the defence of the case, they applied to amend and said, well, actually, because she was identifying as gender fluid / non-binary, that's not transition. So she's not covered by the gender reassignment provisions of the Equality Act. And it came to me and I thought, yes, perfect facts, perfect case, because I knew there was this big issue about whether gender fluid or non-binary people are covered. And I actually knew there was an answer to it, because people have said, well, presumably the tribunal have recognised that society has moved on. Well, no, that's not the basis of the judgment. I mean, we then fought the case and won. The evidence from the managers was appalling. The tribunal say things like hindsight featured significantly in the manager's evidence. So, I would cross it. There were 4 of them, one after another: her line manager, second line manager, person who dealt with internal grievance, the person who dealt with a grievance appeal. And by the end of the evidence, they were all saying, oh yes, we would have dealt with it differently had we thought about this. But there were amazing statements, like they were all asked about the equal opportunities policy of the organisation. And they all thought there probably was one, but they'd never seen it. And this is we're engineers, we build cars, this equality stuff is for HR to deal with. It was just terrible.
Awful.
But what we got the tribunal to do was to look back, because the tribunal recognised this as a novel point. There is no other decision on this point. And we got the tribunal to look back at Hansard, which recorded the proceedings in Parliament when the Equality Act had been passing through in 2010. And that bit was dealt with by Vera Baird, who was the Labour Solicitor General at the time. And she makes some statements very clearly in answer to questions from MPs that say gender's a spectrum, and that what transition is a movement away from natal sex to somewhere else. And when you start that journey, the origin might not be certain. And it doesn't have to be a binary journey from one. You don't have to be aiming directly at the other end of the spectrum when you start.
Absolutely, yeah.
So therefore, all those identities in between are a move from your natal sex to somewhere in between is validly gender reassignment, which I think has come as a surprise to a number of people, but it was always there in the parliamentary proceedings to be found. And I have to pay tribute to a guy called James Morton, who has, I think, recently retired from the Scottish Trans Alliance to go and do other things. But it was James who pointed me in the direction of those statements in Hansard, and knew they were there and was waiting for the right case to come along. And in fact, from a legal perspective, I was a JLR until they lost in the 59-page judgment that you can all have a read of. They just didn't do anything sensible in the case, the way in which they fought it. And I was really scared that they would wake up and smell the coffee through 2020 as we were working towards the hearing.
Yeah.
But they didn't. You know, they continued. They fought this enormously bad point, and gave the opportunity created by Rose Taylor, compliment to her for, you know, having the confidence in her lawyers and in her case to fight the case, to have this point brought forward and ruled on by the tribunal. And in that sense, thanks Jaguar LandRover. And as each witness went by, there were 4 managerial witnesses, boom, 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 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row. And I would go down the corridor and say to counsel on the other side, carrying on with this? You know, because it was so dreadful. Their evidence was just so dreadful. And I was doing my duty on one score, because obviously, you know, we could have settled the case along the way, and we might have settled for something less than the award we got ultimately, which would be is always the right thing for your client. But in professional terms, I was thinking, please don't settle, because I wanted the tribunal ruling. And you know, you could see that the tribunal perhaps were with us in the way that they were asking questions of the managers. So, or at least I predicted so.
Wow.
But what I didn't predict was the way in which the judgment came out, and the strength of the judgment.
Yeah.
Is just, you know, please, anybody listening, it's on the government website for tribunal decisions. Go and read it. It's just great bedtime reading.
And I think it's on your chamber's website as well, isn't it? If you could,
there's a link to it, but yeah, I think we did put it up because we had it first for a while. But you can go to the government website .gov and look up employment tribunal decisions, and you just have to put in the name, so Taylor and Jaguar LandRover, and it will come. It's very easy to find.
Brilliant. And then with Jaguar LandRover, so the award at the end of that, how much did Jaguar LandRover?
Well, they woke up at that point because fortunately, Rose was back in employment relatively quickly. She's a highly competent engineer and has found work in a different sector. And so it's not telephone book numbers, you know, we're not talking about millions. But we claim quite long future loss because she's on a bit less than she was with Jaguar LandRover, so you claim that difference. And JLR did actually wake up at that point, and the night before we were due to have a remedy hearing, they agreed, there's an agreed figure of 180,000 was agreed between the parties. We're not quite finished. We're going back in week or two's time in January we'd like some costs from them. You don't normally get costs in employment tribunal, but we think we should have some of Rose's costs back. Some unusual features, because the tribunal said also that they awarded aggravated damages, which are very unusual in tribunal cases. This is only the 3rd occasion in 25 years that I've been awarded aggravated damages. One, on the basis of the woeful behaviour in the workplace, and second, on the basis of the way in which Rose was cross-examined in the tribunal, which was disrespectful and dismissive of the awful position that she'd found herself in, and the tribunal weren't impressed with that. And they also awarded a 20% uplift because she'd raised an internal grievance, and it was just not properly dealt with. And they awarded the 20% uplift. So all those things were taken into account in the agreed figure of 180.
Yeah.
Just like I was slightly scared that Jaguar LandRover would settle beforehand. In a sense, it's a professional shame that we didn't get the tribunal awarding specific figures for things like aggravated damages, because they're very rare. And it would be very interesting to see what the tribunal would have done.
Yeah.
Equally, I was very happy professionally with the figure that we got agreed between JLR and the claimant.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's not an insignificant amount, is it? Good grief.
No, I mean, you can buy houses for £180,000. So.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, very well done for that. And I think certainly, I think non-binary and gender fluid people all over the UK will be they have a lot to thank you for. So well done.
Well, we did pick it up and talk about it quite a lot, and we recognised that Stonewall called it a landmark case, I think, and I'm sure that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the note of caution is that it's only first instance, so it doesn't establish a precedent. So another employer can make the same argument again, but I've not yet heard an argument that shows in any way the tribunal were wrong in the judgment they made. I've been talking quite a lot about Jaguar LandRover over the last 3 months.
I bet you have.
And I've had some really nice feedback. And I did a talk yesterday for a firm of solicitors, and with a firm of solicitors actually, and to their employer clients and lay clients. And we actually got, I've got a piece of feedback on my phone in front of me from a parent who says that they've got they've got a child who identifies as non-binary, and they were so pleased to see the result in Taylor and Jaguar LandRover, because their late teenage child now feels so much that that the employment world might support them in a way that they would not have done without Taylor and Jaguar LandRover.
Yeah,
it's quite humbling to get those comments.
It's so important. That's absolutely brilliant work. And you've now gone on to co-write a book on transgender and the law.
Well, go on to is a very polite way of putting it. I've been trying to get it done for about 3 years.
Okay.
And the fact that a case settled before Christmas, a longish case settled before Christmas, gave me the slot to do that. But with I've got a wonderful colleague in Chambers called Nicola Newbegin, who's a cis woman, and we did a case called A and Telford for the Health Authority. It's the Telford NHS Trust, where a trans woman was claiming trans discrimination against the Health Authority. So I act pretty much equally for employers or employees in trans matters. So you won't always find me with my flaming sword out there for the claimant. And Nikki and I did that case together, and we have worked quite a lot on trans matters in Chambers together. And it's lovely to have someone that you can cooperate with in the way that I, Nikki. And we identified, we think that there was a slot in the market for a book. And so a practical guide to transgender law will be out in early February. And it's a practitioner's text. So it's not a campaigning text. It attempts to say, here is what the law is. And where there are areas of dispute, here are the disputes, because there are certainly some bits of the law that are not certain yet. The thing about trans is that it's the rarest of the 9 protected characteristics, and you haven't had the cases come through where the issues of debate and dispute have been dealt with yet. They're starting to. The worst thing a client ever needs to hear from their barrister is the law in this area is uncertain.
Yeah.
Because that's the worst bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, then barristers love cases that go to appeal and sort out what the law is, but it's obviously troublesome for clients and potentially expensive for clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah.
Hopefully, the book is a very wide coverage, so it doesn't just deal with employment law; it deals with asylum and clubs and associations and education and trans and the media. We tried to cover the whole field, and
Fantastic.
as well as Nikki, I've got some professional colleagues who've helped me with areas that are not normally my areas of practice. And we hope the book will be really useful.
Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. I've already emailed your publishers to put my name on the list. So as soon as it's out there, I'm ordering it.
Well, I can even perhaps I can even offer to sign a copy and devalue it for you.
Oh yeah, definitely sign a copy. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Brilliant.
it's quite fun. I'm really the book is pretty much on 50,000 words, and because of its breadth of coverage, I'm really happy with it, and I think I hope it's going to be really useful. And we've deliberately kept the price down so that it can be quite widely available, because you can get legal paperbacks can be really quite ridiculously expensive. Now, we've tried to keep it at a sensible price. So, but yeah, looking forward to spending some time this year promoting that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, what I'll put a link at the end of the video of how people can get hold of it. I think at the moment it's a case of emailing the publisher just to register your intention to.
Yeah, it should be out. We hope it'll be out in early February.
Okay. Yeah.
Prediction at the moment.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, I mean, by the time this video's out, that may well be then anyway. So, but I'll put the links on anyway, whichever way it is by then.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for spending the time with me, talking to me today. It's been brilliant talking to you, Robin. Absolutely fantastic, and the work you do is incredible. So thank you. So and thank you to everyone for watching today's episode of Cool People. I've got lots more cool people lined up to do. If you liked this episode, please like, comment, and share, and subscribe as well. That'd be fantastic. And I hope to see you on the next episode.